As Aontú launched its manifesto yesterday, Fianna Fáil leader Micheál Martin counter-signalled the event. In a podcast with the Irish Examiner, Martin ruled out the possibility of a coalition with Aontú. Leader Peadar Toibín made a dig at the debate on Monday about Fianna Fáil being a hollow husk of a party, citing that as a reason not to go into government with Fianna Fáil. X lit up with Aontú supporters sharing clippings from 2020 where Martin said the exact same thing about a coalition with Fine Gael, no doubt aggravating what Toibín called Martin's bruised ego. But don't be mistaken, this is no mere playground-style hair-pulling. Toibín's party leadership skill has yet to be proven, but he is a shrewd and strategic politician. There is definitely more to this than meets the eye. Aontú has been rapidly growing since its founding in 2019. Its impressive ground game hasn't been matched by polling or electoral success, though. The party has consistently got 3% in the polls since 2021, and it got a fairly unimpressive 8 councillors elected in June. Add to that 0 seats in the EU elections when they had a safe one in Toibín and a stretch one in Patrick Murphy, and its failure to keep any seats in the north, and Aontú really needs this election to go well to avoid fading into obscurity. Aontú needs momentum and space to keep growing ahead of the 2029 election. All of this means that Aontú desperately needs to strike a fine balance between telling its potential voters that it has a real shot at becoming a future government party and staying as far away from government as possible. Why? Well, small government parties never do well after they leave government. Just ask the Green Party in this election, Labour in 2016, the Green Party again in 2011, the Progressive Democrats in 2007. The list goes on. The Greens and Labour were able to recover, but the PDs were not. Aontú is not big enough to withstand the toll that government would place on the party. Instead, an extra 5 years of opposition, more seats in the Dáil local councils and in the Stormont Assembly in Belfast, and of course that $250,000 a year in state funding for getting 2% of the popular vote, will put the party in a much better position in 2029. But the key here is to strike the balance. A painful reality of life that many of us have come to realise over the years is that politicians are not always entirely honest with their base. Shocking, I know. To increase turnout, it's essential for Aontú to convince its potential voters that the party is a credible vote for an alternative government. To hold back on any commitments is essential to save face when Toibín inevitably pulls out of coalition talks after 36 hours, if he ever gets into the room in the first place. It's heartening to see Aontú finally strike this balance effectively. Only 6 months ago, Toibín sank his EU Parliament campaign because he was unable to balance the internal and the external messages. The external message at the time was that Toibín, a well-known face in the Midlands Northwest constituency, was a shoo-in for Europe, polling for the 5th seat in the 5-seat constituency. The internal message was that by co-opting his sister Emer into Brussels once the next Dáil election came around, the party would keep its seat in Meath West through Peadar while expanding into Brussels through Emer. Toibín made the fatal mistake of letting the internal slip into the external. He landed 8th in the race with egg on his face and a big question mark over his integrity. This time around, he's doing a much better job of keeping up the pretense that he's open to sitting in government while forcing the hand of his opponents to keep him on the outside. And how is he doing this? By insulting potential partners, of course. It would be too obvious if Toibín ruled out all of the main 3 parties. By shutting off Sinn Féin, it makes him look like he's intent on maintaining the status quo. By remaining open to all 3 parties, he looks like he's not as intent on holding the parties to account at all. Instead, he has ruled out Fine Gael, holding Harris to account, while remaining open to Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin. The kicker is that in doing so, he insults the parties and their leaders so much that it would take some serious humility for either of them to consider talks with Aontú. Politicians, obviously, are not famous for their humility. It's a win-win for Aontú. It tells its voters that it's a credible government party. It holds the current government to account by ruling out Fine Gael. It stabs the other two main parties in the back as, to quote Toibín, hollow husks with no principles. It lets Aontú save face for avoiding the next government while making Micheál Martin and Fianna Fáil look incredibly vindictive. Oh, and of course, Peadar Toibín's favourite thing, he gets more airtime in the process. For Political Strategy, I'm Roger Berkeley.